Is it happening? Yes, it is. I'm live from Jerusalem. It's the Nazarite bringing you Hebrew lore from days of yore. So, Seth Hall, the Nazarite, who is a follower of Yeshua and has a lot to say about Christianity and doctrine and things that I know very little about. So, he said, Hey, Jonathan, I wanted your perspective on Exodus 5, verses 1 through 5. I'm going to read them now from the JPS Tanakh. And afterward Moses and Aaron came and said unto Pharaoh, Thus saith the Lord, the God of Israel, Let my people go, that they may hold a feast unto me in the wilderness. And Pharaoh said, Who is the Lord, right? Adonai Yod He Vav He, that I should hearken unto his voice and to let Israel go. I know not the Lord, and moreover I will not let Israel go. And they said, The God of the Hebrews hath met with us. Let us go, we pray thee, 3 days, journey into the wilderness, and sacrifice unto the Lord our God, lest he fall upon us with pestilence or with the sword. And the king of Egypt said unto them, Wherefore do ye Moses and Aaron cause the people to break loose from their work? Get you unto your burdens. And Pharaoh said, Behold, the people of the land are now many, and ye will make them rest from their burdens? That's 1 through 5, Exodus, the JPS Tanakh. So Seth Hall asks, he says, first off, could the rest that Pharaoh mentioned when he says, look, you are causing the people to rest, could that be in reference to a pre-Sinai seventh-day Sabbath? Some seem to think so, but it's hard to tell. I am inclined to say yes, and little Andre, he brought this from the book of Yashar. Now, the book of Yashar in Orthodoxy, in like Jewish Orthodoxy, the book of Yashar, Sefer HaYashar, there are a few books, first of all, named Sefer HaYashar. The one that I'm going to read from, which Andre mentions, is one where it's a parallel, not precisely a parallel, but it's a retelling of sorts of the events of the Torah. And if I'm not mistaken, it's sort of written in the same way, along the same lines, relatively linear, and leading up to the point of, is it the entering into, I'm not sure when it ends. It eludes me because I never read it cover to cover. And so Andre says this, in the book of Yashar, it says, chapter 70, verses 46, 47. I read this in the Hebrew due to this comment, but I'll read the English which he brought, and it goes like this. And Pharaoh ordered a proclamation to be issued throughout Egypt and Goshen, Goshen being the land where the Israelites, which they inhabited, saying, To you, all the children of Israel, thus says the king, for 6 days you shall do your work and labor, but on the seventh day you shall rest, and shall not perform any work. Thus shall you do all the days, as the king and Moses the son of Batia have commanded. And so first of all, this was on Facebook, and I commented, do you mind if I give my thoughts during the broadcast? I wasn't in a time and place to start writing all of this, and I wanted to open it up. Do you people, so first of all, I didn't get an okay on that, but I'm sure it's fine. Nazarene, Nazarite. Even though I didn't get your green light, I'm still going ahead. And so, what do you people think, first of all? Because, like he said, some people believe that this was a mention of the Sabbath, and some people think that it wasn't, especially based on what it says in the Hebrew, which is that simply you're causing them to rest from their labor. It's not any mention of anything having to do with God or an ancient covenant, but the resemblance or what's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, it's there because some people do believe it had to do with the Shabbat. And Sefer HaYashar, the book of Yashar, says that it was precisely that. These are the same verses, only in the Sefer HaYashar, where instead of the king, instead of the Pharaoh saying that there will be no more, whether they will be given no more assistance, let's say, he puts even more work, and right, he burdens them even further. During what it says in Sefer Yashar, during that time, the Sabbath was reinstated in the land of Egypt, which is really, really cool. I don't remember coming across that, only because I didn't look, not because I'm so learned, and I simply haven't come across it because I didn't look. And it's lovely that people like Seth Hall, people like Little Andre, right, the Nazarite and Little Andre, who are enlightening me. And this is in part why I consider this channel to be about education. I've said this before. It's me educating myself as well. learning as I go along. So let's see. Seth Hall continues and says, I will say this. We see from gathering the manna. Wait a minute. Yes. We see from gathering the manna, the Sabbath was obviously intact before the Sinai covenant. Also, we see Adonai commanding the children of Israel to remember the Sabbath, which could be seen as a reference to them forgetting it in their time, working 7 days a week for roughly 400 years. So the time of slavery was not 400 again, according to Midrash, the Orthodox rabbinic count, let's say 210 years of servitude, right, of bondage, altogether 400, as it was told to Abraham in the covenant between the parts. Different commentaries dice it up in different ways. They get to 400, they don't get to 400, but basically 210. 210? Or is it? Yes, I believe it's 210. I might be mistaken. It might be 130. It might be something along those lines. They're not exactly 400 years. Now, Seth continues and says, this could be God's way of saying, you have forgotten my holy day, but now I am giving you something written and tangible so you won't forget it again, which is a beautiful thought. And the whole giving of the Torah was basically solidifying and making a covenant in written stone and in a revelation to a people, that which was known to individuals or families for, well, since Eden, really. The lore and the wisdom that we know now as the Hebrew faith and the Torah was never completely lost. For some people, it's an integral part of creation, right? And like it says, God looked at the Torah and created the world. So you forgot my holy day, something tangible. After all, he continues and says, after all, Seth says, Abraham kept all his commandments, statutes, and laws, right? When God is saying that, I know that Abraham will pass it on. And when he says to Isaac, I'm doing things for Abraham, who kept my commandments, right? And he's right, the commandments, statutes, and laws. And that would certainly include the Sabbath, says Seth, seeing that it was instituted in Eden, right? That it goes all the way back. And so it was kind of put back into place through individuals, and then maybe through families, perhaps through tribes, and then as a people, right? A unified nation of Israel on Mount Sinai, under the mountain. And Abraham would certainly pass this down orally to Isaac, and Isaac to Jacob, and so on. So yeah, I'm inclined to agree. Now, I don't know if it has to do with the Sabbath or not, but everything has to do with the Sabbath as far as I'm concerned. There's always a way back to the Shabbat. There's a commandment in remembering the Sabbath, right? Speaking of remembering the Sabbath, that's a commandment. And there are people who mention the Sabbath every day when they speak the day of the week. They wouldn't say it's Yom Rishon, Sunday, right? The first day. They would say it's the first day of the Sabbath, Yom Rishon b'Shabbat, of the week. Always mentioning the Sabbath. And after the davening after the praying of the morning prayers, Shachrit, there is the what's called Shesh Zechirot, the 6 remembrances, including the manna, including what happened in the desert, including what happened to Miriam in the desert, including the Sabbath, 2 others which it doesn't come to me right off the top of my head, but I'll spare you. 6 Shesh Zechirot, 6 remembrances, including the Shabbat. Is there anything here right now? Let's see. Anything? No? Cool. Okay, let's plow right ahead here. I also wanted to ask, what is the feast in the wilderness, right? So Moses and Aaron say the God of the Hebrews, right? Adonai has, he met us, he has revealed himself to us, and let us go for 3 days for a feast in the wilderness. Most people, he says, seem to write it off as some rogue feast that was not otherwise expected, but the Israelites seem to imply that not celebrating this feast could result in death and plagues, right? The sword and pestilence, which makes it seem, he says, as though it was a concrete feast that they should have been celebrating all along, one that predates Sinai. The fact that it's in the wilderness makes it seem like it may be some kind of prototype of Sukkot. What do you think? So first of all, it is an interesting idea of what sort of feast or chag was it. Now, no, I'll keep it short. Yes, that actually does sound like a sort of precursor to Sukkot, because you leave your comfort zone. Not to say Egypt was a comfort zone, but they had Goshen, they had a place. The wilderness is the wilderness. So there's that. There's going outside of the familiar. And there's also the idea of Sukkot being called Chag, right? Pesach is Pesach, or Chag HaMatzot, Shavuot is Shavuot, or Chag Matan Torah, or Chag HaKatzir, the Feast of the Harvest. And Sukkot has a few names as well, but it's also known as Chag, simply Chag, holiday. Now, Chag also has to do with circle. It's a circular sort of thing where these are celebrated in a continuum, right? Again and again, every year on these dates. It's the circle of agriculture, nature, life, and the way that the Torah says, remember this, remember that. It has to, well, never mind. There's a lot there in the three pilgrimages, the three regalim, the three holidays of Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot. So yes, it may have been a precursor, a kind of prototype of Sukkot. And when the people of Hashmonai, the house of Hashmonai, the priests, when they took over the temple, they reinstated Sukkot for 8 days, and they called it Chanukah, right, later on. But it was Sukkot that they were celebrating when they lit the menorah and it burned for 8 days, corresponding with the 7 days of Sukkot and the eighth day of assembly. The idea of a feast in the wilderness before Torah, before maybe solidifying that covenant on a national scale or whatever you want to call it, I spoke of Terence McKenna in the past. I've spoken of what was, let's say, before a little bit that I've heard, nothing that I've studied. I'm not a learned man, I'm not an educated man, but I hear different things. And this idea of the tribes, and you know what? Currently, right now, I'm reading a brief history of mankind, or of yes, of humanity by Professor Yuval Noah Harari, and there are different times and where he goes into the book in the beginning, mostly. Now, I've heard Professor Harari speak, not live, right? Lectures, and I've read passages, but I've never read the whole book. It's, I think, his first book, and there's two or three by now. But A Brief History of Mankind, Kitzur Toldot HaEnoshut, and he speaks there of those, and this is why I'm bringing up Terence McKenna, those rogue sort of tribes of people where there is no family unit, right? And there's just like, there's just, let's say, there is no nuclear family unit. Everybody is everyone's father, right? The fathers are fathers to all the children, the mothers are mothers to their kids, but there's also a collective commune kind of a thing. Sukkot. So I'm kind of thinking of that sort of thing. I'm thinking of a festival that is a rogue one, a one-off in the desert. That's a single day, right? 1 day to travel, 1 day to celebrate, 1 day to return. That's 3 days. So it wasn't, I don't know what it was. And even though it does sound like a Sukkot sort of a thing, certain elements of Sukkot are definitely missing. It, technically speaking, or literarily speaking, it looks like a one-off. But what sort of one-off would it be? Would it be a very sacred and elevating thing, or would it be something like what happened after the golden calf was erected? There was also celebration there. They got up early, they drank and they ate and they were doing their thing. And then Moses heard what was going on, the noise from the camp. Maybe it's just me romanticizing it. Maybe it's me wanting something that I would want to happen. The Torah is so full of law. And it's not to say that this sort of feast would be lawlessness or lawless. I simply see it as such, being let go of, if only for 3 days. There's a promise there for the future. I don't know. I don't know. Because Moses says, or knows, he doesn't say it, he knows that they are leaving, not for 3 days, they're gone. But he mentions this one-off feast. Let us go for 3 days. Now, maybe he was simply negotiating and having a proper dialogue with Pharaoh. And I just saw this now, looking up a bit of sources. Rabbi Menachem Libtag says, I don't know him, but I just read this right now quickly, looking into a bit of commentary and ideas about those few verses. And he says, if Moses would have approached the throne and he would have said, I want you to let us go so we can run away and conquer the Holy Land, and conquer the land of Canaan, they would not have taken him seriously. And so what he spoke was something kind of tangible, feasible. Let us go for 3 days. But back to what Seth was saying, a rogue feast in the wilderness or a feast in the wilderness. I must say, I never gave it enough thought. What let's say he had granted them these 3 days, and it would have been 3 days. What sort of feast would it have been? Obviously, with animal sacrifices, no doubt some chanting and meditation, I would think, song. It's difficult for me to not it's difficult for me to disconnect it from the well from the season, from agriculture, nature, plants, herbs, mushrooms, that sort of thing. I don't know what sort of feast it would have been, and it really is me romanticizing it to think that they would have this one day of not like reckless abandon, but of a really elevated, something where it would make them all see that this is where they're going and this will one day be true. I don't know. What if it would have been 3 days and then they would have to, and then they would just go back to being slaves? That was not the way it went down. And God told Moses this, right? When he revealed himself to Moses in the burning bush, right at the sneh. And he says, I know that he won't let you go. I'm doing all this so Egypt will know who I am. That's what he says. He said, and I mentioned this in a previous video a long time ago, where he said, where I was speaking about what Israel had to learn and what Egypt had to learn, and how through the different plagues and the process that went on there until that final liberation and song on the shores of the Reed Sea of Yam Suf. I'm not going to speak of it now. I'm going to say that I like the idea of that Sabbath being there, and I like this idea of that holiday in the feast in the wilderness, which I never gave enough thought to, probably because it never happened. And we see from later feasts, good and bad, kind of what it was about. But this may have been something completely different. I guess we'll never know. It never happened like that. The third thing which Seth says is, lastly, in Hosea 6:7, I'll read the verse, in reference to Adam, the man or the place. So Hosea 6:7, again with the JPS Tanakh 1917, he says, but they like men have transgressed the covenant. There have they dealt treacherously against me. So it says, Avru Adam Brit, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, Avru Adam Brit. Like a person, like a man, they have transgressed a covenant. And it's, I think, from the Hebrew, it's as if they are transgressing against a man. They're doing it to me in a treacherous way, in a kind of maybe malevolent way, where you're out to hurt someone. That's how they're doing it. In the book of Kings, we read about how certain kings went against the word of God and erected those statues and worshiped those foreign gods in order to reveal more of God's anger in the world. Leachis et Adonai. Now, Adonai, Yod He Vav He, is a name of harmony, of beauty, of the middle pillar, what's called mercy, rachamim, balance. And if you are trying to turn the Yod He Vav He and sort of twist its arm and make more mighty the left hand, the hand of judgment, of wrath, of anger, there's something there that isn't accidental. There's something there which speaks about the nature of being as the king or whoever sees it. Now, there was also a very emotional component here. There was a real need, a real thirst, a real hunger, a burning desire to worship foreign gods, what's called Yetzer Avodah Zarah. And so I'm not placing blame or judging. I'm saying that there was this, there was that need, and there was, no, you know what? I don't want to ramble too far, but to turn the divine revelation and make it with your doing on purpose go to the left and bring a revelation of anger into the world, that's you judging the world around you, finding it lacking, let's say. It's not the way you want it to be, and so you want to make others suffer. I don't precisely know if this is how it went down. And yes, there is that emotional component, right? That burning desire. But when it says Yod He Vav He and Lechis, that's what I think of. And maybe it's the wrong way to think about it. But I don't think that simply a mistake or a misplaced desire would bring about such awful war, turmoil, burning, and exile. A real devastation, right? With Assyria, with Babylon. So many tribes are still lost, and so many books are lost, and customs, traditions, lore, wisdom, ways of life, like entire Torahs, if you will, have been lost. I think that we all are human. We are all earthlings. We are human, and we err. But when we do it with a kind of premeditated malevolence and anger, and maybe I'm taking it too far, but it's one thing if you do things by mistake or because of some burning desire, and I'm not greenlighting that. I'm saying I can understand it, having doing it myself. But I really can say that whenever I transgress, sin, work iniquity, whatever the case may be, I never do it in order to bring more anger into the world and in order to force the divine revelation to judge creation through my actions and bring about this wrath. There are times when I do it because I'm angry with myself or with others. Is that exactly the same thing as angering God, doing it to anger the divine revelation? I don't think so, even though that might be the outcome. Because in some ways, as they say in Avot, in the Mishnah, a mitzvah yields another mitzvah, and right, and a transgression yields another transgression. It's a circular sort of thing. It feeds itself, or what's it called? Not circular. It's a anyway. I think I'm getting tired. I think I'm rambling a little bit. So I don't think it refers to Adam or a place according to just the Hebrew. But if you want to say that Adam, the man, Adam Arishon, Adam, you could make the case that as Adam broke that initial covenant of don't eat from that tree, eat from all the other trees, that kind of thing, that first divine law, which was, let's say, broken, or there was no patience, whatever the case may be, if you want to say that they are like Adam Harishon, like Adam, they transgressed and they did it treacherously. And I think that it's man to man and not like Adam before God in Eden, because again, there's that treacherous thing. To transgress is one thing, to do so treacherously is another. And I think, many times the prophets liken Adonai and the children of Israel and the world to right, male, female, man, woman, bride, groom, right, father, daughter, different relationships pertaining to different divine revelations. And sometimes it's, yes, you betrayed me, like a loved one right, who turns their back on their lover, on their person of their covenant, right, that their partner, and they go astray. So there's plenty of that in metaphor and in, right, different prophecies. So you could think of it that way, and you could think of it as just people against people, let's say, or people who betray other people. Oregon Freebird, hi Karen, and Float is here. Hey, yo. I was just listening to a teaching on how God was making his name known to Egypt and the known world by the act of the Exodus. Indeed, previously he was known as El Shaddai, after as Yod He Vav He. Right, so it says there that in the beginning of Exodus, in the second part, right, Vayera, the second Torah portion, which starts with, God said to Moses, I revealed myself in El Shaddai, but they did not know Yod He Vav He. So yes, that's precisely right. It's there in order for that to go down. Egypt, right? Egypt needs to know God. Float says, hey there, buddy, Yadid meaning friend, hello. Doesn't this mean is like in Hove, present? I'm not sure what you mean. If you put the yod in front, it means future present, like will be present. Yihiye, correct. Is hove. Oh, yadid. Okay, so yes, yadid. But yadid is what, a noun, I suppose, right? And you can. It's not a verb. I mean, it. it kind of it shares a root with a very close verb. I don't know if it's the precise same verb, but yes, yadid is friend. Is, yes, hove. Haya, hove, v'yihiyeh. That's was, is, and will be. Yes, correct. But what are you saying that in relation to, Yodidiao? I'm having a bit of trouble understanding the connections here. So that's three comments and questions which Seth put forth on Facebook, and little Andre said, "Well, if the book of Yashar be correct, it definitely was. It mentions the Sabbath." And then he brings that quote. And I said before, I really love it that I can learn new things. I really, really do. Let's see, was there anything else? Yes. Little Andre had a question. I'm going to try and find it here. I thought I had it, but my screen moved. So if I don't find it in just a second or two, I'm just going to carry on. Let's see. I can't find it. Okay, so I'll do it another time. Sorry, I came in late. You did not come in late. You came in when you came in. Yes, Yod Hey Vav Hey is also Hayahu V'Yihiyeh. Yes, in the very simple way, when you utter Yod Hey Vav Hey, when you utter Adonai, and in your mind you have Yod Hey Vav Hey, you can also have Hayahu V'Yihiyeh. And right, if you're this, that, or the other, and depending on your prayer book or your own intuitive prayers, then you maybe set your mind on other letters and other spellings, other punctuation, a different order. But basically speaking, Yod Hey Vav Hey. Hey, hello! Hello, little Andre. Good to have you here. So yes, Yod Hey Vav Hey is Tiferet, the middle pillar, when it's the classic, uh, punctuation of Cholam Chaser, right, of Shva, Cholam Chaser, and Kamatz. Yitzchak, right, will laugh in the future. If Hove means present, doesn't the Yod in front mean he will be future present? So no, because it's not, it's the same sort of root, but it's not a proper word. It's not a proper word. But if you are going to do that, right? So Yod Hey Vav Hey is Tiferet pertaining to this world, as Tiferet represents, let's say, the torso and the center, right, the hub of the lower sfirot, the seven lower sfirot, which pertain to this world by and large, right? The two thighs or legs and the arms, the genitalia, the crown of the genitalia. Yes, he will laugh, Yitzchak. And so Yod Hey Vav Hey is something that's in the middle, having to do with the male traditionally, or the masculine, the father, the husband, the king. Well, not king, not quite yet. And so Yod Hey Vav Hey is something to do with here. If you're thinking of a different word that's speaking of the future, there's also Ehyeh, which is three times, right? Hayahu V'Yihiyeh, Ehyeh. When Moses says, "What name shall I tell them?" And he says, "Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh." Kotomar, right? Yet when Moses meets them later, he does not mention Ehyeh. That was sort of much like that first light of creation that they say was set aside. That Ehyeh was also kind of set aside a little bit. There are different times when you would set your mind in certain prayers or rituals to that name, again with different spellings or different order of letters or different punctuations. But the classic Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh is only that one time in the Torah. Little Andre says, or should I say more since you mentioned me? Well, I mentioned you before. You can say more, but I think I'm gonna go. Yes, I'm getting to feel a bit tired, and I don't want to waste your time and ramble. I want to give you my full attention. So, if you want, please leave a comment, little Andre, or write it right now until I'm done, and I'll see it, right, and press enter, and I'll see it. I hope, unless it disconnects. Or shoot me on Facebook, and I'll mention it on Wednesday. However is more convenient for you. And for those watching now, those watching later, thank you. I hope this wasn't too detached. I tried to have a few things to say about what Seth said, and it's lovely that I'm engaging with these people. That I'm in the middle of the day, and I get a notification, and it's something like this, which gets me thinking, which gets me looking up sources, commentary. So thank you, Seth, and thank you, little Andre. So wait, Exodus 3:14, 3,300 and 38 in Gematria. The same year Shlomo's temple was destroyed. Ehyeh, ehyeh, ehyeh is Navi. Well, that's an interesting Gematria, but again, so yes, again, as a as the dessert after a meal and a what's it called? A supplement to wisdom. Certainly, Gematria has its place. All right, let's have a good night. Thank you for joining me. Like I said, I hope I didn't ramble too much. I'll see you people on Wednesday. And oh, hupanim haofanim. Right. So that's a what's it called? An anagram, if I'm not mistaken.